In higher ed, we're all looking for big wins, but reducing a 75% application abandonment rate and achieving a 90% conversion rate, that's next level transformation. Michael Battersworth, CMO at Texas State Technical College, shares how they achieved this by streamlining the application process with Element 451.
Our Element journey began out of a necessity. We were switching to a new SIS, and the application process was going to pose some real usability issues for us. We felt that application was going to hamper our enrollment. So we began quickly to evaluate different CRMs, different applications. So for context on that, our conversion rate with the prior application had about 75% abandonment of people clicking apply to submit. And the first weeks after going live with Element, we saw an 80% conversion, and that's now up to 90. So improving the usability of that application on the front end process has had a significant advance in our intake.
When technology works for students, it works for you. Visit element451.com to see how simplifying the application process with artificial intelligence will lead to significant results for your institution. Welcome to the Hired Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell, Community Engagement Lead at Pathify. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology. The Hired Geek Podcast is a proud member of the Enrollify Podcast Network, a robust collection of shows designed to help higher education professionals like you grow every day. Explore all of our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Welcome, everyone, to this wonderful episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 264, with Brian from BMTX. So we're talking about enrollment fraud, ghost students, something that I've been seeing some murmurs of in the news. So really grateful for the opportunity to explore it here on this episode. And it really is kind of this interesting intersection of AI. It is both causing the issue and a remedy to the issue, where folks are trying to take advantage of the ease of access to fully self-paced courses, take seats away from other students, and siphon off resources from institutions. So really interesting stuff. Brian does a really great job kind of setting the stage and the problem, why it's important, and what we can do about it. So appreciate him coming on to help elevate this and teach me, and I know it'll be helpful to you all listening as well. So appreciate you checking out this episode number 264 with Brian from BMTX.
My name is Brian Suponcic. I am the Senior Vice President of Sales and Client Operations at BMTX. I have been with the company for 11 years now and have worked in education, both in higher ed and K-12 for over 20 years now.
Yeah, I'm really excited to speak with you and speak about our topics. I think it's one where I've seen a couple of headlines and different people talking about enrollment fraud, and that it is something that is sort of creeping up and becoming a nagging issue for some higher ed leaders out there. So we'll try to cover it as comprehensively as we can, make sure everybody's kind of up to speed and kind of understands what is happening and what folks can do about it. But before we get too far, I want to make sure we kind of give some space too to have you talk about your company, because I'm just learning about it as well. So I'd love to kind of just hear more about it in your own words. BM Technologies, explain a little bit about what it does in the higher ed sector specifically.
Sure. Thanks, Dustin. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. This is a really hot topic right now within higher ed. And so BMTX has over 20 years experience working in the higher education sector. And throughout that time, we have mainly provided a disbursement service that assists schools in processing refunds to their students. So anytime you attend a college or university and they owe you money, they partner with us to get those funds to their students quicker, more efficiently, and electronically compared to what they've typically done in the past, which was paper checks. And those are timely. They open the door for fraud, which is our topic for today, but they're just not as efficient as electronic methods are. So that's been our bread and butter for over 20 years. And we have over 700 relationships with colleges and universities that partner with us. And just last year, we launched the reason that we're here today, I believe, our BMTX identity verification service, which is helping with this unfortunate situation that's popping up right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that idea of being kind of integrated into institutions doing this sort of like kind of core function, I get, like the idea of sort of the financial aspects, obviously that's just sort of like, how any organization runs. They need the resources they bringing in, from students in this case to do everything they need to do. But I will not try to explain it anymore because I don't know that much about it because I want to learn and I want our audience to learn. What are ghost students and how does it, enrollment fraud hurt institutions?
Yeah, they're not haunting the schools. That's not what we mean by ghost students. They're not real students. Foremost, they're fake identities that are created and enrolled at these colleges and universities. Typically, they're focusing on the 2-year institutions, so the community colleges. Most at with the ghost students, they're trying to exploit resources like financial aids, grants, scholarships, and they use either stolen or synthetic identities to apply and enroll at these institutions. In many cases, it's either an online only or some sort of a hybrid option with online and campus combined together. But these bad actors or ghost students, they have no intention of actually learning anything from these classes. They want access to resources like a .edu email address within the school, and then they can activate other scams, the college or university while they are there. But they also use this status as a student to apply for financial aid. And they get financial aid that typically would go to a deserving student who actually wants to attend. And lo and behold, they disappear shortly after the class begins. Or in some cases, they're even using AI or other means to participate in the online classes by participating in the chat rooms. And some instructors are noticing a pattern that 5, 6, 10 students are all providing the same responses, which are canned and coming from the same person, unfortunately. So that's how they're catching some of this. But they're taking advantage of these loopholes, unfortunately, where the face-to-face interaction is. The schools that are most affected are the ones that may not be implementing identity verification procedures and processes.
Yeah, and I think that idea of like I was saying, like acknowledging sort of like what are the platforms and the systems and the processes of financial resources, and payments things going back and forth and all that, and the idea that like someone can intercept that siphon from an institution and it's like, yeah, they're taking up a seat, they're taking away scholarships or different things that should be, like you said, going to deserving students. Like, yeah, this is like a pretty impactful issue kind of across the board. Certainly, I would say more so for the institution, but yeah, then you're having students who may decide to not attend or go elsewhere if you are really being really kind of targeted and impacted by this like ghost student and enrollment fraud issue.
And that's the thing, is that this isn't just about purely the financial aspect. So the schools are impacted from the financial aspect, but it's also, like you said, draining resources from the institutions. And so they're bad actors potentially taking a seat for someone who should be deserving of it. And either they're not going to attend that school, they might not attend at all. And so now it's long term from the education sector and just overall for, I want to say, the economy, it would be pushing people back, because if they're not attending, they're not graduating, maybe they're not getting that next job that they want, and it's taking up space within the institutions. But it's affecting all sides.
Now, I guess as much as you're aware, has this been something that's been going on, but a little bit kind of like just not getting noted, like, or sort of grabbing headlines, or is this really like a very recent sort of, recent issue that's been popping up?
Unfortunately, I think it's probably been going on without much noticing, but it really exacerbated throughout COVID when everyone got sent home, right? No one was going on campus, so everyone was doing everything online. And then the CARES Act came out, and there was all this free money to be had, and the bad actors saw an opportunity, and they went after the low-hanging fruit, unfortunately. And many colleges and universities they're not designed for this sort of thing, like banks might be, to really vet someone at the application process. And so schools really saw it grow and grow during COVID and towards the end of COVID. And that's when we started having conversations with them about how much they were experiencing this. And then it was growing more and more and more. And if you do a simple Google search, you can find so many examples of situations where, thousands upon thousands of applicants have been found to be fraudulent. Unfortunately, most of them after the fact.
And the thing that this makes me think of is that, like, yeah, one, like, I think the pandemic, was just a major catalyst that this may have been like sort of a slow drip issue. Because I think what I'm thinking of sort of broadly is the idea that, like, we have reached this sort of like, watershed moment of digital education normalized, proliferated. And, you had that sort of upswing where everything was delivered online. And, we've kind of like started to kind of the pendulum swinging back the other way. But like the trend is still moving towards institutions that are trying to build up their digital education portfolios. And if they're rushing into it, or just not doing it as sort of intentionally and responsibly as they should, I'm just imagining this is like a gap area that really, unfortunately, will probably only crop up once it sort of gets out of hand. And you're gonna be like, oh my God, like what the heck is it? Like it's sort of this really rude awakening versus it being something that would really like be kind of very tangibly and like kind of really apparent to someone before they would even like, launch and announce a program. Like you just wouldn't necessarily maybe think of this until it's an issue. So is that something that you've experienced where it's like, oh my gosh, like we just launched this new program and now they're experiencing fraud because they just didn't do their due diligence?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the challenge is schools have enrollment goals and the school presidents are tasking them with increasing enrollment and finding new ways. And online classes typically can help with that. But then that becomes the problem is if you're not properly vetting at the front end, you may see an instant increase. Like you might roll out a brand new class and say, oh my gosh, it filled up in an hour. We just filled 30 students in that class. Let's open up another one. And then you open it up and that one fills up, in the same day. And it makes you think, what's going on here? And then you come to find out that now you've reserved classrooms, you've maybe hired instructors, and these students are taking up space in your student information systems, and you're giving them all email addresses. And then you come to find out that they're not. That's really a challenge because now you've got inflated enrollment, and you've got the financial aspect that we already.
Well, and you mentioned too. So I think just another like accelerant to this is AI. Like can probably just help people facilitate this quicker. Unfortunately, but I imagine AI can also be part of the solution here. So I don't know if there's anything that's actually happening or that you're envisioning happening where AI can be part of the solution here to help mitigate enrollment fraud.
Sure, it surely can, and you hit the nail on the head. It's both the problem and the solution because the bad actors, anytime new technology comes out, people find a way to exploit it, and they're doing that for sure. It's making it to forge fake identities. It's making it easier to find the loopholes within the system. And what we found is we're fighting AI with AI and using machine learning to think like the bad actors and to learn from their patterns. And the way I've been explaining it to schools is you have to put up roadblocks for the bad actors. If you put up a roadblock here, what are they going to do? They're going to move over to this side and try to get around that roadblock. The idea with AI would be to put up that roadblock before they even have the chance around. And so that's really, we can go into more detail, but that's really, I think the way that AI is going to help this fight is to be a step ahead of the bad act using it as part of.
Yeah, I guess like what I'm thinking of is that like similar is just the idea of like what are sort of the variables that have been like getting this issue to this point where it is now kind of grabbing more people's attention and kind of news headlines and whatever else. The other thing that I thought of is like that idea of there obviously, it makes sense. And this is something that should be kept in mind is like, we want it as easy as possible for students to like apply and enroll and like do all these things. Like there's kind of a goal towards like efficiency and just sort of ease of access into like higher education. And you're giving sort of like a comparison point of like, with banks and stuff, you're trying to like open bank accounts. Like we do want that to be sort of like somewhat quote unquote hard. So that idea of like using AI to try to like maybe kind of intercept points in the process to sort of, if it's flagging something, you might need to do sort of like further validation and all that. So like, I guess confirming if that's sort of like thinking is correct, is that like with the sort of pendulum swinging kind of metaphor, like we swung towards like obviously just increasing digital education at institutions, but also just that idea of like trying to earnestly make it easier and more efficient to enroll, to apply and enroll into higher education. The idea that we maybe need to like swing back a little bit to just put in some like maybe just common sense stop points and and stopgap measures to kind of validate people's identity, using AI and other measures and things. But is that sort of like the thinking and the idea is like you need to kind of like slow down the process, and if something is flagged, maybe like have someone have to validate their identity further than they might need to otherwise?
Yes and no. So I think the idea is there should be more going on, because to your point that there's more and more of this happening, and they're trying to enroll more students, but you want to make that process frictionless, because if I get halfway through an application and I say, oh, this is taking too much time, you might lose that student. So you don't want that to happen if you're an institution. But the beauty of our process is that it lies behind the scenes. And so we're not creating any friction in that vetting process. The institution gains access to the data that we're providing. And then, like you said, they can then determine the next steps that they want to take. And so if there are some red flags that pop up for any given student, they have the opportunity now to call that student in to meet in person, for example, or provide a driver's license, passport, or some proof of identity. And the schools that are implementing something like that right now, they're finding that their answer pretty quickly. When you call a certain student in, they go up. That's kind of
Right. And I think it like just in my mind, it's like, you can get to a point of, I think, getting like the best of both worlds where it's like obviously like just interactions with the institution, like kind of engaging, whether it's sort of like through the application process, making sure that they're like feeling supported, they get things in, like, and even just like helping students like choose the right program, the right modality and stuff like that. Like, and then certainly when they're a student, reaching out to provide support and like different things like that. Like, I think it's that idea of like, we want an environment where students feel engaged and supported, like they're sort of building a supportive, community, building relationships and whatever else. So it's like trying to take, I guess, a similar philosophy and embed it where there is either the explicit goal or the implicit outcome of like, well, we're going to like, no, this is actually like a human being. Like we want to like, maybe give people metrics and goals of being like, hey, all right, like let's make sure we like reach out and, actually speak, not just like send a message, like speak with like, these students who are coming in or different people, like just because I worked as a coach and I think it's that idea of like, you can certainly observe behavior and know like, okay, the student is like submitting assignments, like doing all that and like whatever. But it's like, you get just obviously like very clear validation when you're like speaking with them on the phone and like, okay, like they're feeling good, they're doing good, they're they know what's going on, they are planning ahead for next semester and all that. But it is sort of the idea of like, and then you also know that they're a real person. Like like the idea of like that is sort of like a secondary goal and
right.
like what I would be doing. But like you may have people where they could be empowered to be doing it when like, yeah, maybe there is some sort of flagged behavior issue or something, is like, we need to reach out this person, actually talk to them on the phone or bring them in person to know that they are an authentic student. But then also,
Right.
like the secondary goal in that situation would be, okay, I got them in here or I got them on the phone. You're not obviously gonna be like shaking them down like some like, law enforcement person or whatever, but just being like, hey, great to hear from you. So excited that you're, a part of our community here. Like wanted to just like check in, make sure you're feeling good as, your first semester gets under. But like that idea that like that interaction can be a positive one where then the secondary goals, it feels like they're like, being supported, solving problems and stuff. So
Exactly.
yeah.
It's more getting back to the human side of things, right? It's during COVID, we got away from that and nobody was meeting anybody in person. We did everything digitally. And it's a total concept, I think, of the entire application, enrollment, and student experience on campuses. And that's a great approach to just take it from that angle and say, we just want to reach out. And yeah, we want to know you're a human being and you're not a bot or somebody that's trying to steal someone else's money. And quite frankly, if I'm a student, I would want there to be an important vetting process, because if you know that there might be a bad actor that's taking a seat that maybe belongs to you or to someone that you want there to be a good vetting process, because you want to keep those people out.
Right. That's a very good point, I think, is that like an institution being able to tout like we are doing this and it's important to us because like it is that idea too where it's like I can just imagine just like this crazy scenario where you're like the only human in a class and it's just all like AI bots or whatever else. And we're just like, well, now I'm getting like a worse product. Like what I'm actually paying for as an authentic student is now worse because you're not sort of like doing due diligence, like validating whatever. Like, that's a bit of like ridiculous scenario, but it's just that idea of like, oh, okay, great. You institution, leadership and everything, respect the sort of sanctity and kind of sacredness of like this learning experience. You want to make sure that even if that means fewer heads, and kind of butts and seats, whatever, it's like those are authentic students who are there to learn and are like creating a good experience for their classmates and everything. Like, yeah, you're gonna have to like invest, the time and the resources and like, work with partners, whatever it is. Like, some of these things, like it is just like that important. Like you need to be starting somewhere. You can't just be doing nothing. And I think through our conversation, at least, even just flagging that, like, there obviously is that temptation through, having like completely asynchronous education where it's like, oh, it could almost just be its own little like self-sustaining, like passive income kind of thing. Like how people talk about that, like where it's like, oh, it could just like be almost like completely hands off. It's just like there and students enroll, they take the courses and, whatever. And it's like, it's going to be a bit of a risk to just like, be kind of laissez-faire if you're trying to go like completely asynchronous and everything else. It's like, there's got to be humans like involved, and a lot of, at the very least, kind of, the crucial kind of touch points and that whole process of like bringing students in, getting them into courses and teaching them, making sure that that's, you're just taking kind of a common sense approach to, doing this and, using the right tools to do it as well.
For sure. Yeah. You can't turn a blind eye, right? You can't turn a blind eye to, wow, enrollment is great. It's, we're up 50% over last year, but half of them, like you said, are just bots sitting in a classroom.
Well, yeah, and it makes me think of just sort of like, as we've kind of rode the roller coaster of like social media, some people are like, oh my gosh, like looking at my followers, it's like half of them are bots. Like that's not, like you're trying to like tout this and do whatever, like everybody suffers, I guess. But
it's like anything else, that one of those monotonous things that we have to do in our lives. Like why do I have to have a password on my computer? It seems, maybe seems silly, but you understand the purpose behind it. And it's the same concept here is, okay, maybe I have to show my ID or maybe I have to, come in person, but there's a reason behind it. It's protecting the sanctity of that seat at that institution.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess in your mind, like, what do you see on the horizon for this issue? And I mean, I don't want to get too like doomsday or anything. I'm sure this is just going to continue to be kind of like, insidious and kind of, getting into all the kind of nooks and crannies at institutions and everything. So I think we can make that acknowledgement that like, this is not an issue that is just going to be like going away at any point. But so I guess maybe if, just for my sake and everyone else, if like maybe like an optimistic tone to kind of looking to the future, like what do you see on the horizon for this issue? Because I think like AI, obviously, like you're saying, like it's almost like AI battling each other. Like this is just like a new frontier, and this is like an aspect of it. But I think like there's still a lot to sort out about how we can maybe harness it, for good. But yeah, just from your perspective, what do you see on the horizon for this issue?
So I think, unfortunately, you're correct. I think it's here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future. The bad actors, they're just going to keep finding the loopholes and the low hanging fruit. And I think as we start to see schools implementing procedures, whether it's using our tool or their own or someone else's, they're going to put up those walls, and the bad actors are going to move on to the other schools who maybe don't have those walls put up. And I think that's going to continue until or if most schools have something in place. And even if they do, we know that the bad actors are going to use the AI to try to get around it. And the best ones, unfortunately, they will. And like fraud's up across the board in every industry, unfortunately. And so they're working their hardest. It'd be nice if they would use their talents for good rather than for bad. But I think we'll continue to see AI change and morph with this issue, particularly to, again, from our perspective, to try to stay one or even two steps ahead of where the bad actors are. And that's not going to be the case in every institution for sure. But as it's learning from each situation, it's going to enhance itself, and it's going to grow and change and become something bigger and better as time goes on. And quite frankly, as more schools use our tool and others, they will learn from each other. And so we'll learn from a school on the East Coast who may be experiencing something that the West Coast isn't, or vice versa. The trend, like fashion or other music, sometimes it starts on the West and it makes its way East. That can be the same thing here. So if we're seeing trends on the West Coast, for example, we may be able to stop that from happening before it even happens on the East Coast. So that would be sort of my vision for where this goes. Again, I don't think we're ever going to stop all of the bad actors, at least not the really good ones, but we need to try and figure out who they are and hire them. So maybe they can go work with Elon or something on building a rocket.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I guess this like feels like there's sometimes in my mind as a kind of a, I guess like a naive person when it comes to this, like, abstract concept of like cybersecurity. Like, it's like, yes, we want to, prevent, hackers or whatever else, to be getting sensitive data. But that like this is from the higher ed perspective, like a really important sort of like bulwark of the idea of like students enrolling and like taking advantage of things and abusing systems and, creating enrollment fraud. Is this important sort of really clear, tangible thing to do to increase the cybersecurity of a higher ed institution? Because obviously it's going to be coming from other angles and other ways, but like this is kind of an important place to kind of be examining and looking into and investing and understanding. And because I think it could be something that would be this sort of like leech or, kind of slow drain, versus it being like, oh, somebody like breached us and they like took all of our data or, ransomware or whatever else, like that could really like make a institution sort of like buckle under that. But this could be, and again, as we've kind of gone through this conversation, presumably it has in the past been kind of this like unnoticed issue, but it is now getting to a point where it sort of demands attention from higher ed leaders. And I'm glad we've been able to kind of explore it a bit more here. And I certainly learned a lot. But I will give you the final word. If you have any advice and or resources that you'd want to share with folks on this topic to kind of keep their learning going, keep the conversation going, the floor is yours.
Great. Appreciate it. Yeah. So I think if you just do some internet searches, you'll find a lot of information on this topic, particularly for institutions in higher ed as it relates to our service. They can visit identityverification.bmtx.com and learn more about what our service does and how it helps. But I, as someone who's passionate about higher ed and learning, I want to make sure that schools are protecting themselves, and we want to see everyone protect the sanctity of those seats, the legitimate seats for students, because that's what we need in our education industry.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you kind of giving us a crash course here on ghost students and enrollment fraud and what we can do about it. So just appreciate your time and all that you've shared here. And again, we'll have ways to connect with you and BMTX in the description for the episode here. But just really appreciate the time and the conversation.
Likewise. Thanks, Dustin. Appreciate the time.
The Higher Ed Geek Podcast is a part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances you like all the other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing constantly, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help you find your next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your host. Learn from people like Jamie Hunt, Seth Odell, Dave Kibbolds, and Eddie Francis, as well as so many other of your favorite leaders in higher education. Enrollify is made possible by the support of Element 451, a leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.